Deuteronomy is the 5th book of the Bible. What are the first 5 books of the Bible called? The Torah, the law of Moses, the Pentateuch, right? The 5 books of Moses. 5 books of Moses. Who wrote the books of Moses, by the way? Man, y'all are smarter than you look, right? That's good. That's good. Books of Moses, 5 books of Moses, right? And if some of us have read the Bible all of our lives, some of us have not, and so we're keeping in mind as we study that there are people at different levels of knowledge of Bible in the class, right? So if I say something you're like, that is a dumb question, well, it probably is since I said it, but it may be appropriate to different levels of knowledge. So Genesis, from creation, right, through Joseph in Egypt, right, and at the end of Genesis, they're bringing Jacob's bones back, and the idea is they have a promised land. God makes 3 promises to Abraham. What are the 3 promises? Anybody remember 3 promises to Abraham? Okay, what would they be? That his nations would first of all the land. He promises them what? This land that you see, I'm going to give it to you. Second, have a large nation, as many as the stars of the sky. And third, Jesus. That in your lineage, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. That's a promise concerning Christ. It's a messianic prophecy. So, why does God? This is very important to Deuteronomy because we're going to see this comes up right away. Why does God bless Abraham? What's the reason for faith? Abraham believed God, and God counted it to him as righteousness. Abraham was a good man, but he made mistakes. He wasn't perfect. It was his faith in God, and God said, I'm going to count you as a just, good man because you trust in me. You're loyal to me. You're faithful to me, all right? And of course, we are children of Abraham if we live by faith, right? Okay, so Abraham has children, and the patriarchs, patriarch means like the old guys, right? The people who went before you. The main patriarchs are who? Abraham, who's his son? Isaac, Jacob, yeah. And Joseph's in there, but it's really, and Jacob has how many sons? 12 sons. How many daughters did he have, by the way, that we know of? A whole bunch. Dinah is his main daughter, right? But so he has daughters too. Those 12, from those 12 come the tribes of Israel, right? And you have 2 half-tribes. They're going to come up in here. I'm just going to make sure we all know this. Joseph has 2 sons. What are their names? Manasseh and Ephraim, right? So you don't have a tribe of Joseph, right? You have a tribe of Manasseh and Ephraim, right? So those will be, we're going to see those names come up. So those 12 tribes, they live in the land of Egypt, and they're in Egypt, and eventually they're shackled. They're in bondage in Egypt, right? So they live in Egypt, and they become slaves to the Egyptians. In the book of Exodus, you have this famous Exodus, this exit, where God, through Moses, remember Moses saw God at the burning bush, and Moses, you know that story, we heard a good sermon on that recently, and Moses takes Israel out of Egypt, delivers them. Israel, who was called Israel? Anybody remember? Jacob was called Israel. That's the name that God gives him, you remember? After he wrestles with God, and God names him, remember he wrestles with God and knocks his hip out of joint, right? And what does Israel mean? Yes, El is the Hebrew Hebrew word for God, and Israel or to wrestle with. So Israel is the one who wrestles with God, or the nation who wrestles with God. And if there's a more appropriate name for this nation throughout the Old Testament, I don't know what it is, right? They're constantly struggling with God, mumbling and questioning, but then coming back to Him. Wrestling is a to and fro, there's kind of an interaction there. So they come out, and you may recall, they go to the Mount Sinai, this great mountain, also called, what's another name for Mount Sinai used in the book of Deuteronomy? Starts with an H. Horeb. You're right, that's another name. We'll see that name. Mount Sinai is where God is, lightning and thunder, and God speaks from Mount Sinai, and all the Israelites hear it. And God gives a certain number of commands, of teachings, right, from Mount Sinai. How many did he give? 10 commandments, right? But Moses has to go up twice, remember, because Israel was unfaithful. As soon as they get these commandments, they're already worshiping false gods and breaks the commandments. Moses punishes them, makes them drink the water that he had put the dust of the idol in. You remember that? And so they go and they start marching towards Israel, the Promised Land, Palestine, Canaan, also called the Levant. And it's over there between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. That's where Abraham had received the promise. And they get there and they send over a number of spies. Remember that? 12 spies. 2 come back saying, we got this. 10 come back and say, those dudes are big, right? And Israel grumbles. They murmur, complain. Go back to Egypt. Why have you brought us here? We're just going to die. We can't beat these dudes, right? And God punishes them. Remember, they're about to go over that first generation coming out of Israel, out of Egypt. And so they're about to go in. God punishes them, and he punishes them to a wandering in the wilderness for how many years? 40 years, right? Until that first generation coming out of Egypt dies, okay? And so they're wandering around in the wilderness, right? And so you have 3 books that relate the laws that God gave to Israel from Sinai and in the wilderness, both, okay? Those are Exodus, we already talked about it, Leviticus, and Numbers, right? And so if you were to go flip back in your Bible, just even to Numbers, what you would see is there's a bunch of laws that God gives from Mount Sinai and in the wilderness, and gets related in the course of the book of Numbers. And one of the things that we read about over in the book of Numbers is the sin of Moses in Numbers chapter 20. You remember we talked about this last time. Instead of telling the water to come out of the rock because they were thirsty, he strikes the rock. Yeah, out of anger, and God punishes him. And so, and he says in Numbers chapter 20, verse 12, because you did not believe me, notice that, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. So can Moses go over to the promised land? No, he's a dead man walking in that regard. And yet, he nevertheless leads the Israelites through those 40 years. Okay, 40 years. We talked about this last time. Yeah, 40 years of wandering, dying in the wilderness. Deuteronomy begins with the words, these are the words that Moses spake to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness. And so they're out in the wilderness. Moses now, at the end of his life, they've been wandering. They're in the 39th year, and it's time to go into the promised land. And Deuteronomy, you may remember, is Moses' retelling of the commandments that God has given, the story of their wandering and how they came out of Egypt. And more than that, him just retelling it, he's going to explain it. This is God's law in an inspired way, explained by Moses. He's going to, he's lived 40 years with these people. Right? You get to know somebody pretty well that way. And so you have uniquely in Deuteronomy the laws filtered through kind of Moses' experience. It's inspired. He's speaking in an inspired way. But this is more than just kind of law, like a rule book. This is spoken through the heart of a man who's led the people for this long time. So you're going to hear a lot about Moses in the book of Deuteronomy. And so this is the story of Israel, God's family. We emphasize that. They're in relationship to their forefathers, Abraham, and to each other's and brothers and sisters. But they have cousins in the land. You remember who was Jacob's brother? Esau. And the descendants who came from him? The Edomites, right? And we're going to see similarly, Ishmael and others have descendants who will come up in this. Lot has descendants. They're going to come up, these nations, the Amorites and the Ammonites and these sort of Moabites and these guys. So we're going to read, well, some of these nations are related to Israel. We're going to read about the relationships there. Okay, so here is, you may be able to see, you may not be able to, the picture of the wandering. let me just kind of remind you a little bit of, you may be able to see that little dot right there. See, it's on Lim's face right now, but no, here it is. Egypt, they go down. We don't know where Mount Sinai was. Some people believe it's up here, but you know, this is Egypt over here, Mediterranean Sea. This is Canaan, the Promised Land, the Jordan River. What river is that? What lake? Or what lake is that up there? The Sea of Galilee. This is the Dead Sea. Also, we'll see it's called the Sea of the Arabah. We're going to see that name. This area in here is known as the Arabah. Okay, they go down Mount Sinai, they receive the law, and then they head up to Kadesh Barnea. That's an important name. Remember, Kadesh Barnea. Okay, what happens there? Well, you can see that's where they send out the spies from. That's where they murmur and they complain. We're going to read the name of that here in a second. Kadesh, and so they're in here, notice here, 38 years, they're wandering all in here, you know, for 38 years. That's not that big of a space, right? So they're just kind of milling around, right? And then in Deuteronomy, we see them heading out from Kadesh Barnea, going up. We're going to see them encounter in our lesson today Edom, Moab, Ammon, and they're going to come over here right about where you see that number 13, right around in there in the plains of Moab, and it's in that area that Moses will deliver the words of Deuteronomy. So they're about to go over. Remember, at the end of Deuteronomy, he's going to be able to go up and see the Promised Land. He goes up and Mount Hermon and sees it. So this is the land that we're talking about here, and so they've wandered and they've come to this place where they are going to be. I think I have one more. I don't have my thing on there, so this kind of zeroes in. It's kind of fuzzy, but you can see these are the kingdoms that they encounter here, and we're going to see how they behave in relationship. You see Edom, the descendants of Esau. Edom had defeated the Horites, right, which were another nation. And God gave Edom that land. They had a promised land. They had, in a sense, a place that they were able to come. And Moab, formerly the Emites, right? They're going to have this is the descendants of Lot. Who was Lot? Nephew of Abraham. So this is family members, okay? They had their land, and God. You'll see. We may not get to it tonight because of the time. God goes and they go and they say, "Hey, don't you fight against the Edomites." And don't you fight against the Moabites. I've given those lands to them, okay? But he's going to get up here to the kingdom of Ammon, right? And King Sihon. I don't see Og on this, but there's another king up. Oh, there he is, right there. King of Bashan. He's way up north. King of Bashan and the king of Ammon. He's like, those guys aren't related to you. You take them out, okay? And they will devote, as Deuteronomy says, they will devote those people to destruction. And what they're getting ready to do is to be able to cross over here the Jordan River. And that'll happen in the book of Joshua when they cross over. And so Deuteronomy is the story of God's, from this location, telling what's happened before and predicting what's going to happen in the future. These are the Philistines over here, right? And they had taken over the land of the Avites. Okay, and Phoenicia up there. But we'll see reference to all of these places. When they go over into the Promised Land, they cross over the river. One of the first cities they will take, not the first, but one of the first is Jericho. That's where that is. Okay, and I've been to Jericho, and you can see, if you're sitting in standing in Jericho, you can see the Jordan River. I mean, you can see the green of the Jordan River so it's right next to there. So these are real places, and they're traveling here in the wilderness. By the way, is this land through here, is this real lush, green grass, kind of prairie, jungle place? What's it like? What would you say? Dry and barren. Rocky, dry, and barren. Not good land. This is a wilderness, the desert land. Okay? So let's jump into Deuteronomy. And we read a little bit last time about how Deuteronomy, Moses speaks to the people there. And he names all of these places that they had been through. You can read it in verse 1. And he says it's 11 days' journey from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea. We saw that location there. So they're making their way over to Israel, right? And so he's going what he's describing here is Moses is giving these laws at the Jordan River right before they cross over. And he says in verse 5, he says, beyond the Jordan, the land of Moab, we saw where that was, Moses undertook to explain this law. Okay, so it's not just a giving of the law, right? He's going to explain it. We're going to see a description of it. Have you ever taught somebody something? You need to help them understand it, don't you? You need to, and so Moses is going to help us understand the law in a variety of ways. That's really, really, really valuable, and we'll see that. Verse 6, he says, the Lord our God said to us at Horeb, you have stayed long enough at this mountain. Turn and take your journey. This is about a family journey, and we're going to learn about some things about what it's like to journey with our family through life, metaphorically speaking. Go to the hill country of the Amorites and their neighbors at the Arabah, to the hill country and the lowland, the Negev. And so what we've seen is that is this land right up here. This is the Ammon, right? This is that area where he says, go to that place, right? And the Amorites and all their neighbors, right? The Canaanites, etc. I've set this land before you. Go and take possession of the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. How long had they been wandering around in the wilderness, right? 40 years. 40 years. And notice in these verses here, you have, excuse me, I'm losing myself. You see it has reference to the locations that they've been, in terms of where they've been, and also, though, it has reference to how long they've been wandering. If you go forward, what you realize is Moses says to them, so the places and the times of our family, we come from places, and we got to pay attention to where we come from, right? You know who you come from? I'm looking at a father and a son. You know who you come from? Yeah. Jeff, who is your father? What's his name? Ken. You know who his father's name was? Roland. You know who his father's was? Okay. Anybody know more than 3 generations back who your father's grandfather's name was, or grandmother's? Anybody know? Someone must know. Your great, what, 4? Who's your 4th? Nimrod. Really? That was the name? That's a good biblical name. Bless that man's heart. Nimrod. That's great. That's great. That name didn't stay in the family, I don't guess. No, okay. Do you know who Nimrod's father was? Okay. Okay. We don't know their names, but they are very much with us in our genetics and the effect. You probably live where you live, maybe related to who lived before you. Our family affects us. We bear the impact of the people who have gone before us, whether we like it or not. We need to recognize that. You can reject it, maybe we need to, but you're influenced by it, right? And so that's certainly true with Israel. They carry their story with them. And Moses is going to say, your forefathers didn't do what God said. Will you do what God says, right? And also the time that they spent walking in the wilderness. That was an important factor. But here's the thing. They had these forefathers that God made the promise. But Moses is leading them. And you got to realize that this book is not only about Israel and God, it's about Moses. And we're going to learn about ourselves through Moses. Moses in chapter 1, verse 9, he says, at that time I said to you, I am not able to bear you by myself. The Lord has multiplied, and behold, you are today as numerous as the stars of heaven. May the Lord, the God of heavens, make you 1,000 times as many as you are, and bless you as he has promised you. But how can I bear myself the weight and burden of you and all your strife? Okay, question. Was Israel's size, was it small or big? Evidently it's big. Were there hundreds of thousands of people? Okay. Was it a good thing or a bad thing? You said good, you said bad. Yes. A lot of people, right? God had promised he'd bless them. And Moses says, may the Lord bless you, right? The problem was there's so stinking many of them. And as a ruler, as a leader, as a parent, as a, John tells me all the time he wants to have 10 kids, right? But the The problem, John, is what? You know, you've got 4, and you barely hold on to them, right? And as a parent or a grandparent or, you know, a spouse, you recognize that things can get out of control really easy when there's a lot of something. It's true in a church, right? Church, the Lord blesses us and we grow. That's a great thing. And we say, Lord, bless us. At the same time, we're like, oh man, there's so many people to keep up with. You see the prayer list, you know, and Bonnie's over there adding people to the directory. She's complaining to me all the time. She says, stop bringing people. No, I'm kidding. So, you know, she does a great job. But blessings have a burden to them, don't they? And that's true with Moses. And that's okay to acknowledge. You know, this is hard, he says. And by the way, are they always saying good things? Are they always so pleasant and kind of, you know, appreciative of Moses? No. He says there in verse 12, he says, how can I bear with your strife? Right? Kids cry. Kids disobey. Spouses are grumpy. Right? We have problems with each other. And so Moses, the ruler, is having difficulty. And so that's just a lesson for us. Whatever our role is, if we're trying to help people out, if we're trying to lead them, kind of give them guidance in life, it's a difficult thing. And so he says, how can I deal with you? Okay. So in verse 14, he says in verse 13, choose for your tribes wise, understanding, and experienced men. And what happens in these verses, you may have read it, is Moses takes wise men, and what does he do? He sets them up, and they make decisions. What kind of decisions are they to make here? Notice what he says, when you judge righteously, and notice you're judged between a man and his brother or the alien. Wait a second, is there E.T. in this book? What does that mean? What's an alien? This is the ESV. That's a non-Israelite, a foreigner who comes in. Question, can you be a Jew in the Old Testament and not be of the tribe of, and not be a descendant of Abraham? Can you be an Israelite and not be of the tribe of? Answer, yes. You can be a proselyte. You can come and start living as a Jew. So even in the Old Testament, it wasn't just the descendants of Abraham. It could be people who started to be an observant Jew. If they're male, they're circumcised, but they all end up, you know, eating kosher diet. They end up worshiping on the feast days. But the alien is the person who comes in and just starts to live among them, a foreigner who comes among them. And so God's justice extends to the stranger, the person who's someone who's not an Israelite. So the judge is supposed to do that. And he says, you shall not be partial in judgment, right? Basic principle. What is God doing? He's setting down principles for right action, right? And Moses is teaching. We would mistake Deuteronomy if we thought that it was just some kind of book of dry laws. Moses is teaching the people how to live. He's giving them guidance. This is for life. He's a preacher. He's a pastor. He's a sort of elder to them. And he's given, don't be intimidated, right? For the judgment is God. And if the case is too hard, what were they supposed to do? Bring it to Moses. So he's interested in there being good judgment, justice done, okay? Do we value justice? Do we want right decisions to be made? Absolutely. So you have that principle. But this is how Israel was supposed to live. Now what Moses does in chapter 1 is he goes back and he recalls what happened to this generation's parents. And he's going to go back and say, you need to pay attention to what happens to your parents. We've already talked about it. You've got to know your history. Not because you're going to do the same thing they did, but you can learn from their good things and their bad things, the mistakes and the proper things they did. And so he goes back and he says, you know, we set out from Sinai. We went through all this place and we came, remember Kadesh Barnea? Remember seeing that before? The idea is there. He says, we set out from Sinai and we went up to Kadesh Barnea, and that's where they set out. They make their way up there. And so he's recollecting now. He's going back and he's saying, I want you to tell you this history. And so God says, he said, you know, go into the land, take the possession. And he said, let us send men before us that we could explore it. He said, that was a good thing, God said. So they took 12 men, they spied it out. They took the fruit of the land. They said, it is a good thing is a good land that the Lord our God is giving us. Positive thing. They see the promise is coming. It's a good thing. But the bad thing is as soon as they see the good land, what happens? They say, okay, let's go in, let's be blessed, all is good. What do? They rebel. They rebel. Notice, and yet you would not go up, but rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. You murmured in your tents. He's brought us out of the land to give us to the Amorites. How are we going to go up? The people are greater and taller. The sons of the Anakim are there. These are these great giants in the land. Goliath was of this descent, right? And so, Moses said, don't be in dread. Don't be afraid of them. God is going to fight for you, right? God is a warrior. And he's going to protect you, right? He's going to be, in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses doesn't describe how they defeated these cities. He just says you're going to. As long as God is fighting for us, you don't need to worry. And so he says he will go before you to fight for you. And in the wilderness, you've seen how God has carried you. And notice, so he's a guide to them. And this is a key idea. How does he guide and carry them? What is he to them? Like a what? Yeah, like a man or a father carries his son. God is the father of the Israelites. What do we say? Israel is God's family, right? We are God's family. And God cares for us like a father, right? He cares for Israel like a father. And so all the way that you came to this place, yet in spite of this, you didn't believe the Lord, who had, he carried you all the way. He was in that pillar of fire and cloud to show you the way you should go. Why did Israel rebel? Why did Israel rebel? One of the primary reasons is fear. Fear. They're afraid. They're afraid. Why do we rebel? Fear at one level. Fear of the thing that would do you wrong. Also, an important part of this is, you ever gotten in your life to where you're on a roll, you're serving God, and you're living the right life, you're getting zealous on things. We're studying that. Kobe's going to teach us the next lesson. Lim did a good job. It's like you're getting zealous in your life, and you're like, I kind of got my stuff together, getting this stuff together. What often happens in those moments? You're kind of on a roll. What happens? Yeah, huh? You're tested, exactly, and so you're tested, and maybe you pass the test. Let's say you pass the test. You're doing good, and then you falter and you fail. Why? Why do you rebel? Why do you rebel against God? Oftentimes, it's that we're fearful of how good we're doing. That sounds strange to say, but it's like I'm living a righteous life. This is kind of scary. Yeah. You get complacent. You get complacent, or you say, you know what, I deserve a little bit different. I'm going to give in to something. There's some kind of fear of serving God that sets in. Fear is a strange word, but the idea is I'm doing something. I got to give in a little bit. And Satan uses those kind of fears, those kind of temptations. And Israel, they can see the land. We can see the good that God's going to give us, but we get afraid of whatever it is, and that's what causes them to change. Any observations about that? So watch out for fear. Yeah.
I think, like I say, complacency, and you let your guards down.
Yeah.
Because he's always proudly rating.
Absolutely.
Somebody.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Might be the victim.
Yeah. And I guess the point is, what I have learned in life is, you learn those moments when you're weak. They come around. And so you got to be especially attentive. Oftentimes when we can see the prize, the promise, we can see, we feel that we're getting there, that's where the devil will take advantage of us. It sounds strange, but it's true. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 34. The Lord hears this and he is angry. We learn a lot about God. Is God a God that can be angry? Both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Let me just remind you of something. Turn in your New Testament over to 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 5. Paul's been talking to the Christians, and he said, you've been suffering, and you're going to be rewarded for your suffering. And he says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 5, he says, this is evidence, what you've been going through, of the righteous judgment of God, that you may be considered worthy of the kingdom of God, for which you also are suffering, since indeed God considers it just to repay with afflictions those who afflict you, and to grant relief to you who are afflicted, as well as to us, when the Lord is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire, inflicting vengeance on those who do not know God and those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus. Paul says what? 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. Is God a vengeful God in the New Testament? Yes, he is. And what's going on? He's being patient with people because in the end, he's going to take his vengeance. The God of the Old Testament is God of the New Testament. Sometimes we contrast. Yes, the way we worship him is different. The nature of the salvation is different. But God is, and God, he gets angry. He gets angry with Israel. And he says, none of these evil generations will see the good land except who? Caleb. Caleb. You know what? One thing that's interesting, he was the son of Jephunneh, but one thing that we don't read about here, Caleb was a Canaanite, K-E-N-N-I-T-E, Kenite. He was not an Israelite. Caleb was a Gentile, right? And so there's a lesson here even in this. The idea is that the people who serve God are often the people who we wouldn't expect. You know, you could have been sitting in here in church all of your life, complacent maybe, kind of grown lukewarm, and then you see someone coming off the street. They've hardly ever stepped foot in a church, right? And they come in, they learn the gospel, and man, they are zealous, right? You say, how could that be? How can someone who's been raised in a pew all of their life be complacent, and someone who comes in just be zealous and on fire and serve, and for the rest of their life they're faithful? How can that be? Right? Because, right, you don't inherit Christianity. You don't inherit faith. You choose it, right? You choose it. That's a choice you have. And so Caleb was someone, he wasn't a child of Abraham, right? But he was someone who, because of his commitment to the Lord, he was zealous enough to say, we've got this. We've got this. We can do that. And so God is not a respecter of persons, just like he wanted his judges not to be. You see that? And so we need to be individuals who recognize that God can use a Caleb, and his children are going to be able to go into the land. Joshua, who also was one who was faithful, he'll enter it, and he'll be the leader there. And we need to be thinking, by the way, of those who are going to come after us, bringing up the next generation, thinking about the Joshuas. Who can we bring along there? You know, that's why these kids are so, you know, they're not pension now, but we need to be thinking about how can we be encouraging them, because those are the leaders of the future. You know, we've got to be investing. That right there represents kids that are going to be around, you know, 60, 70, 80 years from now when you and I are cold in the ground, you know, sort of thing. So we got to be helping those young guys right there. Okay, he says, encourage Joshua, for he shall cause Israel to inherit it. As for your little ones who you said would become a prey, your children who today have no knowledge or good of evil, they shall go in there, and I will give it to them. They'll possess it. But as for you, turn and journey into the wilderness. And so they go for 40 years. Now, the one who Moses is speaking to are these children, okay? He's speaking to that next generation. And did you answer, oh, no, we have sinned. We were wrong. We can do it. They were trying to be repentant there in verse 41, right? And we'll go up and fight. Was it too late? It was too late. God had already passed his judgment. He says, don't you tell me in verse 42 that you'll go up and fight. I'm not going to be in your midst, right? And they tried to go in, and the Amorites beat them. And so many days they stayed at Kadesh, and they were wandering in the wilderness, okay? And so they wandered in the wilderness. Chapter 2, okay, we're still in the first sermon of Moses, where he's recalling the journey of the family. What have we learned? Does it matter where you come from? Yes, right? It matters where you come from. And we got to watch for those moments of great success becomes failure. As leaders, we recognize that our greatest strengths can be our greatest weaknesses. The more of them there are, the harder it gets. And we've seen that God is a warrior. God is a God who will protect us. So chapter 2, Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 1, they turned to journey into the land of wilderness, and for many days we traveled around Seir, right? And so now Moses is talking to the new generation. Okay, they're dying out, that older generation. And he says, you're about to go pass through the territory of your brothers, the people of Esau who live in Seir, and they will be afraid of you. Were they supposed to fight these are the Edomites. Were they supposed to fight the Edomites? No. No, he says, you don't do that. Don't take that land, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. Okay, question. God's providence, what he gives, what he provides to people. Is God in control only of Christians and Christians' lives, or is he in control of everybody? Everybody. God's providence is for the entire world. Are there people out there, Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims, whose lives God is in control of? Yes. Yes. And so, there are people out there who God is working on. And he had given this property to Esau's descendants. And he says, I've given that to Esau. Don't you take that. Okay? So you got to think about what God is up to in the world beyond our own little circle here. He says, he says, this 40 years the Lord your God has been with you. You lack nothing, and so he'll protect you. And so they went on to the land of people of Esau, and they didn't take over. Now, they go to the land of Moab. Remember, Moab was a little bit further up north, right above Edom, right? Whose land was that? I'm checking your memory. Who was the descendants of Moab? Who was their forefather? Lot, good. Nephew of Abraham, right? Go up to there. God says, don't harass Moab or contend with him in battle, because I've given Ar to the people of Lot. You see that? This is family. And so family needs to recognize other family. Okay? So, local churches. Are we the only church of God in the world? No, there are other churches out there, and we need to respect the fact that that's a church the Lord presumably has blessed and that's working on. And so we're being careful. The other day Ismail says, why don't we just go down here to this church in Tampa and just take those people and bring them to church here? I said, Ismail, don't do that, right? No, but you could go and try to say, we're just going to take over. We're going to go plant ourselves there. We got to be respectful of other people's place, right? And that's what God's teaching them. He's in control of places. We don't need to think just so selfishly. They had taken over the land of Edom. The Horites had lived there, and Esau dispossessed them and destroyed them before them and settled in their places. Israel to the land of their possession. So God has given Esau's children and Lot's children land. He's going to give to Israel land. So they went over to this land, to this brook of Zered, and notice, we crossed the brook of Zered. The time from our leaving Kadesh Barnea, where they had been cursed, till we crossed the brook of Zered was 38 years, until the entire generation, the men of war, right, had perished from the camp as the Lord had sworn for them. Can you imagine going through the wilderness and one by one, these people go to their grave? That's a horrible thought, but God's judgment. And notice, did it take time for God's judgment to come to fruition, to come to pass? Yeah. Who knows what sorts of things are going on in our life that God is working through, whether having punished somebody or having blessed somebody, okay? Indeed, the hand of the Lord was against them to destroy them from the camp until they all perished. That's the generation that has died out. Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 16. As soon as the men of war had perished and were dead from among the people, the Lord said, today you will cross the border of Moab at Ar, and when you approach the people of Ammon, do not harass them or contend with them. I will not give you the land of that people of Ammon as a possession, because I have given to the son of Lot for possession. We've already looked at that. And so I think I want to get down to, but the Ammonites call themselves this great people of Anakim, okay? And so he's given that. Okay, now notice here. As for the Avim, this is verse 23, as for the Avim who lived in villages as far as Gaza, these people who came, destroyed them and settled, rise up, set on your journey, and go over to the valley of the Arnon. Behold, I have given into your hand Sihon the Amorite. Is he related to anybody of the Jews? No. Amorites, bad dudes. We read in the Pentateuch that God says, you know what, you can't go take the land until the sins of the Philistines and the Amorites is at its full. These have been sinful people who are idolatrous, and he says, I'm going to fill up their sin. They have to run its course, and then you'll be able to go into the land as punishment. Begin to take the possession and contend with him in battle. This day I will put to the dread and fear of you and the peoples who are under the whole heaven, who shall hear the report of you and shall tremble and be anguished and because of you. So don't fight them, fight them, right? God's got a plan for them. They're going in and they're going to fight not the Edomites, not the Ammonites, but the Amorites here, okay? And so we'll see the king of Bashan as well. So they send a message to Sihon, and you get down, Sihon wouldn't let us pass. God hardened his heart and made his heart obstinate. Who does that remind you of? Pharaoh. God had hardened his heart. And God doesn't, you have to understand, God doesn't come in and control people's heart, but allows them to respond to circumstances in a way that they choose, right? And so, you know, if all of a sudden y'all all turn against me, you know, and and I feel like you don't love me, and my heart grows hardened towards you, that's my fault, right? But that is a result of the way that things turned out. God allowed that to happen. And so in that sense, God hardened my heart by the circumstances. And that's what happens here to Sihon. Circumstances harden his heart. And he comes out, and the Lord gave him over to us, and we defeated his sons and all his people. And we captured all his cities at that time and devoted to destruction. That word devoted is a religious word. In other words, you devote something to God. Notice this is a hard verse, by the way, to read. Devoted to destruction, every city, men, woman, and children. We left no survivors. Only the livestock we took as spoil for ourselves with the plunder of the cities that we had captured. Right? We didn't draw near to them. So this is an account, really, of kind of genocide. Destruction of entire people. We got to ask, why would God allow this to happen? Why would God allow an entire people to be destroyed like this? Any ideas on that? Good explanation? What would you say?
Sin, you know, because if you teach someone how to be corrupt.
Right. That's right. They were corrupt. Everything in the Old Testament, go ahead. Yeah, everything in the Old Testament indicates these were sinners. These were people who were doing wrong. It's hard to see the children aspect of this, to be sure. But this was what God wanted. And why did he want these people destroyed? Purify it. And what is he trying to establish? He's trying to set up a covenant with Israel where how many gods are there? One God. The Amorites had many gods, right? Can you plant a faithful people in the midst of a sinful people and expect them to survive? Not very easily. Not in this culture.
There's a scripture that says that
evil companionships corrupt good morals is one of them. Yeah.
the other is sort of the opposite. Good to be able to influence.
Well, and that's right. You want it. And in the present day, we are lights in a dark world, right? There's darkness all around us. But the point is that God knew that in this context, if he planted his people in a land full of idolaters, they'll be drawn away. Who's the king who was drawn away by all of his concubines and his wives? Solomon, yeah. That's the principle. We're drawn away by sin. And so God, this is one of a few occasions in the Old Testament where God has the people destroyed so he can plant his people. And it's a response to the evil people's sin, but it's also such that his people can grow up. Okay, he defeats Sihon, and then also he goes to Bashan. Remember, Bashan was far north up there by the Sea of Galilee. They devote everyone in Bashan. Similarly, the destruction of every city, this is verse 6, every man, woman, and child, right? All of them were destroyed. Notice, Og, the king of Bashan, was of the Rephaim. So you have these giants in the land, and he had this huge, 12-foot long bed And so he's a big giant. And these were the guys that scared the Israelites when they first saw him. Was Israel able to defeat them? Absolutely, because God was with them. Okay, so God is accomplishing his purpose. He's respectful of the family, the descendants of relatives of Israel, but these evil kings and their nations, they destroy. So they take control of all of that land. Okay, now notice here, they're on which side of the Jordan are they on? If the Jordan is that river I showed you, which side? Are on the left or the right? They're on the right side. That's the east side of the Jordan, right? They haven't crossed fully into the promised land, and so they're over there, and still that area of Og, that part of the east side of Jordan, I gave to the half-tribe of Manasseh, right? And so he gives that to them, and he gives to the Reubenites and the Gadites, he gives some of that land as well. And it's interesting. So these three tribes get some land. They're the first to get it. They hadn't even gone over and started to fight in Canaan yet. They get kind of the first land, right? You're like, oh man, that's a good deal, right? The problem was, in the history of Israel, as you read the Old Testament, when Israel gets besieged by foreign countries, what's the first land they get taken over and lost? This land. The one that Manasseh and Ephraim and the Reubenites and the Gadites get, okay? So, question, when we see good things, is it always the best just to seize on the first good thing that comes to us? No, it's not. You got to ask, is this really what's best? It'd been better if they waited when they go over there, but they grabbed that and they had requested it. We read in later, and so there's this idea that they took what was first available. But he says, okay, the Lord has given you this land to possess, but you're going to go over the Jordan with your brothers. Only your wives and little ones and your livestock will be able to stay there. Okay, and then you'll be able to come back over here, right? And so I commanded Joshua at that time, your eyes have seen all the Lord your God has done to these two kings. Which two kings were they? Sihon and Og. That sounds like probably one of Judy's grandfathers, you know, those kind of names. So, these two kings. So will the Lord do to the kingdoms which you are crossing. You shall not fear them, for it is the Lord your God who fights for you. Okay. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? If it's a righteous effort, who's going to fight for us? God is. And that's a lesson that we take even from the Old Testament. Okay. We'll conclude with this in 2 minutes. The final section of the chapter is Moses setting up cities of refuge on the side of the river. We'll come back to that next time. This is a little insight into Moses, okay? And so I told you, a lot of the book is about Moses. Let's read. Moses says, I pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord God, you have only begun to show your servant your greatness and your mighty hand. For what God is there in heaven or earth who can do such things and mighty acts as you? Please, let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that good hill country and Lebanon. Right? He's praised, Lord. He's praying to God. Does he get what he wanted? No, he doesn't. He doesn't. The Lord was angry with me because of you and would not listen to me. And the Lord said, enough from you. Do not speak to me of this matter. Go up to the top of Pisgah, the mountain, and lift up your eyes westward, northward, and southward, eastward. Look with your eyes, for you shall not go over this Jordan, but charge Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he shall go over at the head of this people, and he shall put them in possession of the land that you shall see. And we remain in the valley opposite of Beth Peor. You get some insight, and I just want to observe, you know, all of us in our own life, most of us are old enough to where we have some kind of a leadership responsibility. You know, we have families, we have friends, people looking to us. Moses is an example of someone whom, though he's a godly man, there was never a man like Moses who saw God face to face. Is he fully satisfied in his spiritual life? No. He has things he wants, he needs, and he prays. And does God give it to him? No. And so we should learn from the example of Moses. We, no matter what our spiritual maturity, we will still have genuine righteous longings that we won't be able to fully realize, you know. And so just to recognize that's our lot, and God does not give us, if you didn't know, everything that we pray for. And that's just a reality. But Notice what he does say is, you raise up Joshua. You help another person do that thing that you want to do, and then I'll do it. You saw that in the life of David. What did David want to build? A temple. And who got to do it? Solomon. And so, general principle, if you want something in your life and you're not able to achieve it, it's a noble and spiritual goal, and you realize that I'm not getting this, the question should be what? Who can I help receive that which I can't? So here's the thing. Like, for example, let's say that you're a older woman, okay? And, maybe you're not able to get out and get strong and as much as you used to be able to, or you feel insecure going up and talking to people just because of your condition in life, okay? What can you do? You say, I want to be able to be more evangelistic or just more encouraging. And maybe you pray, Lord, help me with that. And it's not coming, let's just say. What can you do? You can encourage and teach some young man or some young woman to that. And it could be just the littlest thing, right? When I was in Atlanta, I would teach class every now and then. I had a lot of insecurities about teaching class. And there was a woman, I can tell you, I'm blanking on her name, I can see her face, I'll tell you. She regularly would come up and encourage me after every class. And I'm going to tell you, as a young man, how much that meant to me. And when we left Atlanta, I just said, you got me through some really hard times. You did. And I want to tell you, ladies, there's some men teaching these classes, and boy, I'm telling you, they're full of insecurity about that. The more you can do to encourage them in that, I'm going to encourage you to encourage them. That could be an example. Or maybe it's your children, your grandchildren. You're trying to plant some seeds. Build up a Joshua, and that's what Moses learned he had to do. Okay, so we got through the first 3 chapters, more or less, and so we'll slow down as we go forward, do a chapter at a time or so. And so chapter 4 is where we are next time, okay? And we're gonna learn about how God's people, God's family, begin to commit themselves to God. How can we commit ourselves to God? Okay, and that's really important. So chapter 4, okay, for next time. Let's say a prayer. And so, Brother Ismail, would you stand and lead us in a prayer, and we'll be dismissed.
Father God, heaven and earth, thank you for your Son making that sacrifice, giving us this hope that through believing in you and trusting in you, that you could help us give up the past. We want to live in the past. It strengthen us to look forward and to embrace this new perspective, this new way of life, following you. Get us home safely. We pray for those that are sick, my Lord, that you heal them and comfort them. We pray especially for Larry, that you get him through this. If your hands on the doctors and the nurses and the team there, my Lord, and encourage Larry in the spirit, my Lord, to look up to you. Please, Father God, give him strength, my Lord, and heal him, Father, so you could glorify you with his life. Thank you again, Father, for the Spirit. Thank you. We just want to encourage one another in the Spirit and each out. And we just pray that Judy got home safely. In Jesus' beautiful holy name.